Kurt Wallander is a young, fierce and edgy criminal investigator in the series Young Wallander that premiered on Netflix on September 3rd, 2020. In the first season, we get to follow Kurt as he goes on the mission of identifying and detaining suspects, solving crimes, and forming interesting alliances, to say the least. The story we get to take a part of focuses on the formative experiences, both professionally and personal, that Kurt faces as a recently graduated police officer in his early 20s. Usually in my analysis videos, I tend to focus on analyzing the character's psychological profile as a whole as he or she progresses through the plot. But today, I'd like to put the spotlight on a specific ability that we get to see Kurt exhibit throughout the first season, and that is Kurt's ability to disarm and immobilize hostile people using only his words. We've all found ourselves in situations that could be considered dangerous, if not objectively, at least subjectively to us. One thing led to another, and after a brief exchange of words, there we are. Our gut is telling us to run, and no, maybe it's gone too far, and it's time to fight. Yet, as both you and I probably already know, making that decision is not always that simple, and it's not uncommon for us to lament on how we chose to act or what we should have done instead. These types of situations are highly emotional for both you and the aggressor. Even though you might have seen a similar situation before on TV or practiced a similar situation in your head, we as human beings still for some reason struggle to take control of our own emotions, and rarely can we just flee or engage in a mixed martial arts battle like many like to fantasize in their own heads. So what can we do? It's true that some of us are better than others when situations like this arises, and some of you out there may hold the belief that this is a gift that someone is born with. My aim is that with the help of Kurt Wallander, assist you in changing that belief and improve on your conflict resolution skills. Side note, I'm fully aware that there are other characters who may be stronger negotiators than Kurt to analyze, and quite frankly, Kurt had more or less failed every single hostile negotiation he faced up to this point, which is exactly why I chose to take him as a study subject for this video. He serves as an example that this is a skill that can be taught with patience and practice. Effective communicators know that if a potentially explosive situation is a near possibility, the best way to defuse the other party's aggression or completely disarm the hostile person's advances is to have a plan beforehand. Criminal investigators and police officers are trained to deal with hostile people regularly, and all of them have pretty much one thing in common when preparing for an altercation, and that is to shift the altercation from a heated debate into a calm negotiation. When we make the shift from a debate to a negotiation, we surpass the common incentive of trying to come out ahead in a zero-sum game where someone has to lose for us to win, which causes a lot of us to commit logical fallacies, whether intentional or not. To initiate this transition, we have to take the first step of negotiation in our own head, meaning that, if we can help it, we don't walk into a tough conversation combative or unprepared. If you and I are lucky to predict beforehand that we are unfortunately about to go into a potentially heated situation, it lies in our best interest to do as much of the groundwork before facing our interlocutor. We should aim to exhaust all potential resources that could help us understand the person we're talking to. There are often other ways of gaining more insight on the matter before facing him or her that doesn't entail stepping on their toes, such as asking people you have in common, looking at their track record, making sure that what you're bringing to the table are facts and not opinions, and reminding yourself to focus on the argument or issue at hand and not the person, aka the ad hominem fallacy. Prepared negotiators not only make less mistakes, but also command more respect both during and after the negotiation. Research beforehand can act as protection as well. If the other party gets knowledge of us doing our research, they will be less likely to try to deceive or harm us, out of the fear that the probability that they will be punished, identified or caught will be more likelier. Some of the best negotiators out there write their thoughts on paper prior to the confrontational meeting. Then they rehearse the key points in their heads and walk into the situation prepared with information rather than anger.
I could say this off the top of my head, but without as much certainty as if I look at the paper.
Some negotiators will open up a difficult conversation by reading what they wrote down, not to be cold or distant, but rather to make sure that the stage is set properly.
And you have the benefit of being able to look at a piece of paper with the exact words written on it. It allows your mind to wander forward. In other words, because you have the paper there, you can run another dialogue in your head, which is listen to what they're saying, developing a strategy for later down the line, right? You want to keep all your resources as much open to other things as remembering a script, so it's right in front of you.
And you might be thinking, that sounds all good in theory, but what if you don't have any time to prepare for it? What then? All negotiation seems to have one important theme in common. and that theme makes it irrelevant when, where, or who we're talking to, and that is that all negotiation begins with listening. Even if we can't always prepare for or foresee a heated altercation, we can always count on listening as a tool to help us out. Some of us are better than others at it, but fortunately for us less gifted, listening, like any other skill, is something that can be improved upon. People who don't listen very well tend to charge into arguments with their hearts in their sleeves, hell-bent on trying to change the other person's opinion without really understanding the other person's motive or reason. I've learned that bad negotiators usually have one thing in common, and that is that they all want to be understood before they are even open to understand. They make the encounter all about themselves and use the other party to validate their own opinions or self-evaluation. On the other hand, effective communicators make the negotiation about the other person by validating their emotions and creating enough trust and safety for a real conversation to blossom. Like the old rehashed quote from Stephen Covey's book on 7 effective habits of highly effective people goes, "We have to seek first to understand, then to be understood." This does not mean that one has to agree with the other person for the sake of agreeing, but rather understanding that to be an effective negotiator and calm the other person down from their aggressive state, one has to be able to see the situation from his or her perspective. Like Kurt, you and I want to be able to communicate that although I'm not you, I could imagine that if I were you, I would feel exactly the same way as you do right now. Why is this underlying message so crucial? Well, let's say someone expresses a strong emotion and it looks like that emotion could be a barrier to effectively communicating with them. Acknowledging that emotion is one of the most powerful tools you and I can utilize to show him or her that we understand their perspective, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. And that's how Kurt is able to speak to a terrorist who otherwise holds an extremely different view on freedom and humanity to eventually freely agree to go back with him to the police station. Going back to the earlier statement, part of the power in this statement is that it is true in pretty much all cases. If you were the other person, you would feel exactly like they feel because you would have their life experience and knowledge to go along with it. So using this phrase isn't entirely wrong, but on its own, it's not really enough to get out of a difficult situation. Going one layer deeper, one could transcend the combative framework by digging deeper into the other person's emotional world simply by helping him or her to understand and label the core feeling behind the words they're expressing. Sometimes, people use their speech and aggression in order to attempt to get to the bottom of what's really bothering them on the inside. You have perhaps been in a situation where somebody is telling you about a seemingly straightforward problem. You act a part and you give off the impression that you're listening in the beginning. But in your mind, you've already thought of and came up with a solution to their problem. As soon as the conversation reaches a lull, you offer your solution, which you're proud of. But to your astonishment, you end up getting backlash and you wonder why. In many cases, it's often because the person is actually not ready for a solution, simply because they aren't looking for it yet. Instead, they want to define the problem first, and what they're actually asking you to do is to participate in helping them define the problem clearly before looking for a solution. Why, you might ask? That sounds so stupid to me, I can hear you say. Well, the reason why is that one can't solve the problem until you've clearly defined it. And how you clearly define the problem is by trying to take in as much of the pretext that is available and necessary before jumping to any conclusions. Each of us enters a conversation with our own opinions, feelings, theories, and experiences about the topic at hand, and they make up our personal pool of meaning. When two or more people enter a dialogue, we build a pool of shared meaning, which could loosely be summarized into: the more we add of each other's personal meaning, the more information is available to everyone involved, and the better and more accurate become the decisions being made. We then solve the problem by actively listening and participating in the dialogue in order to formulate exactly what the problem was for him or her in that particular situation. Labeling is a way of validating someone's emotion by bringing the hidden message to the forefront and acknowledging it.
An immigrant community, single parent homes, mostly led by women. A lot of times the guys that were on my team were the oldest male in the house, so a lot of responsibility had been thrust upon them. And as a result, some of them straight off the straight and narrow, unless they were provided an opportunity to participate in organized sports. That's where I came in.
It sounds like in a lot of ways these kids are kind of missing out on life.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was in their spot, so to speak, when I was coming up. I grew up in a house that didn't have a father.
It helps give someone's emotion a name and shows that you understand how that person may feel. But most importantly, it gets you closer to someone without asking about external factors that you know nothing about. It's a simple and easy 4-step process that entails active listening, identifying, formulating, then solving. To better identify another person's emotions, it helps if you and I can easily identify our own. Identifying emotions is helped by becoming more adept at reading body language, particularly by looking for discrepancies between the other party's words and their body language and note changes in their tonality. To truly become effective at this, we need to make it a habit to monitor how we ourselves act when we are feeling nervous, angry, frustrated, stressed, happy, sad. What subtle cues do you give away when you're in those emotional states? For example, do you shake uncontrollably when you're scared? Well, whatever you do, you can be quite sure that you're not the only one. When you understand and recognize your own emotions, you'll be able to identify them in others more easily. Effectively reading other people begins with effectively being able to read ourselves and requires practice and empathy. Empathy in this context is about understanding the feelings and mindset of another fellow being in the heat of the moment, but also deciphering what is hidden behind those feelings so we can increase our influence for the better in all the moments that will follow the interaction. It's about bringing our attention to both the emotional obstacles and the potential pathways to getting to a mutual understanding that could lead to an agreement, even when we are under distress and the other person is threatening your life or sometimes even threatening his or her own. Without empathy in the negotiation process, it can be easy to come to a standoff. Those on the other side of the table can dig in their heels and be less willing to budge. However, when empathy is utilized correctly, the opposing side feels understood and begins to feel like their thoughts, feelings, and concerns are heard. The possibility of an agreement is built on goodwill. Effective negotiators make it a point to try to assume the best about others. Admittedly, the more difficult the person, the more work this takes. That's why it's crucial that the disarmer put themselves in the shoes of the disgruntled person. They need to understand what they might be feeling, and in order to even being open and able to understand, they need to assume that the person they're facing may have good intentions, even if the execution of those said intentions haven't been great.
Balacharanishta. It means no choice, right? Why didn't you have a choice? Whatever you've done, I know you did it for them. I can see that. You did it to protect them.
Viewer discretion. Now, it's important to know that this isn't always the case. Sometimes people do want to inflict harm or cause damage, no matter what you do. But world-class negotiators and elite-level disarmers don't immediately assume that that is the motivation of the other person. Instead, they lead with good faith and ask why and how questions. Why do effective negotiators use why and how questions, I can hear you say? Well, for starters, asking why or how questions puts the feeling of control back into the other person's head instead of leaving the onus entirely onto ourselves to wade through the other millions of possible reasons why they said what they said or did what they did. But more importantly, it grants the other person the opportunity to share what they believe to be true, instead of leaving them feeling that they are being controlled and manipulated by something we've planted in their head. However, asking why or how questions can sometimes lead to disastrous outcomes if the tonality of the question is judgmental or too inquisitive. It's crucial that the tone behind your question is one of openness, curiosity, and empathy. If one does this correctly and they answer honestly, then we've successfully built a safe ground on what we can continue asking questions on to understand why they're disgruntled. Plus, it has given us an idea of what the focus of the conversation needs to be from that point forward, based on what's actually true to them, not what you or I think is their truth. When approaching the hostile person, we need to make sure that every single part of our body is aligned with what we're trying to communicate. If our goal is to diffuse the situation and reason with the person, we need to make sure that we choose our words carefully. Any slight hint of aggression from your part will escalate the situation and make your counterpart not listen to you anymore, regardless of what you're saying. You might be as right as anyone possibly could be, but if you don't get listened to, it's worth nothing. As a general rule, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Therefore, we need to make sure that you and I come off as neutral, empathetic, and cooperative. How do one do that, you might ask? Well, we need to utilize one of our biggest assets, our voices.
I care and being likability are two of the most critical elements of getting into rapport and maintaining rapport.
The tonality in our voice is much more important and impactful than the actual content of our words. Even when you and I actually feel like killing, our voices must stay calm with an undertone of interest and warmth.
And that creates that little bit of reciprocity, and so when they say, well, okay, nice person, he sounds like he cares, I'll listen further.
It's also important to try to not make any small noises that can easily be interpreted as negative or insulting. This is interestingly displayed during one of the first times Kurt attempted to create a bridge between him and his hostile counterparts.
Yara, stay where you are. I just want to talk. Okay?
Yara, det är snusa.
No, hey, stay where you are. Running's not a good option, I promise you.
Kurt used the right words, but due to a slightly hostile tone that had a commanding downward deflecting tonality and the way he projected his demand, the question created a threatening vibe which rubbed his interlocutor the wrong way and forced Kurt to recalibrate and ask the same question again, but with a different vocal projection.
And immediately the whole conversation is framed differently because of the tonality I use. The words or the same.
As you probably already know, there are hundreds of different tonalities out there that one could learn, but for the sake and purpose of this video, I'm going to narrow it down to 2 effective and alternative ways of using your voice in a heated negotiation provided by the former FBA negotiator Chris Voss. A. The late night FM DJ voice. Or B. The positive playful voice. The late night FM DJ voice is a tool that one could use selectively to make a point.
Now, inflect downward. Makes you angry. What is he telling me with that? I hear you. I get it. I'm picking up what you're laying down.
It entails inflecting one's voice downwardly in order to keep it calm and slow. When done correctly, one creates an aura of authority and trustworthiness without triggering defensiveness. On the other hand, we have the positive playful voice.
Makes you angry. Now, inflect upwards on that. Makes you angry? What is he asking me? Yeah, expand upon that.
This, according to Chris, should be one's default voice in a hostile negotiation. The voice is meant to resemble an easygoing, good-natured person. The subcommunication expressed is a light and encouraging attitude, much like the following clip.
How did you have no choice?
والله بتشعر زي ما
Did someone force you to do this?
The key here is to relax and exude curiosity and interest in your tone.
But wait, he doesn't work against me. Well, she doesn't work against me in her internal dialogue. It's in conjunction. They're in that sort of that weird magnetic zone that's called unconscious rapport.
Tonality is super important as our tool for effective communication, but we shouldn't forget that the clarity in our words, thoughts and actions are as important as our tonality, and they need to be crystal clear in order for us to not confuse our interlocutor. In short, we should make it clear from the minute that it is our turn to speak what the preferred outcome is. However, the message needs to correspond with their own disposition. It is not uncommon to witness a hostile argument between 2 friends or couples where one party screams at the other party to calm down, which in itself is a paradox of practice. Another example of the same token can be seen when people ask someone else to relax while themselves are speaking or moving quickly. In order for you and I to disarm the other person and make them feel safe and calm around us, we need to ensure that our tonality matches the content of our words, and that our words matches the disposition of our body language so that our interlocutor is not getting any conflicting message radiating from us. This is something that we see Kurt do repeatedly throughout the interaction. Kurt reminds the hostile person exactly what he wants him to do, which is lower his weapon and give his side of the story. Kurt even did something very risky in order to align his words with his thoughts and actions by throwing away his gun. This risky action allowed Kurt to prove to his counterpart that he intended to remain congruent with his message. But more importantly, getting across the underlying message, which is also the most important lesson of this entire analysis. And the message follows: I understand that in order for your mind to change, I have to show you, not tell you, but show you that my mind can be changed too. There is no other message that is more powerful and more essential for you and I to get across in a heated discussion than that exact statement. And following up that message with a smaller concession is an excellent way of building goodwill and move the conversation towards a more positive light. The key here is making sure that the goal is one of a win-win outcome where both parties can leave feeling that they got what they wanted. Occasionally in a negotiation, one reaches a point in the interaction where there's a standstill and the other party seems to hold out for no specific reason. Usually, they're holding out not because the proposal on the table is inherently unacceptable, but more so because they want to avoid the feeling or the appearance of showing weakness by giving in and backing down to the other side.
I'm talking with Stella Ting-Toomey from California State University at Fullerton, author of Face Negotiation Theory. Stella, what is face?
Face negotiation theory is a theory conceived by Stella Ting-Toomey, a scientist with a PhD from the University of Washington in Human Communication. In 1985, Stella conceived of a theory and a framework that helped describe how people from different cultures manage rapport and disagreements. Stella declared that the notion of a public face or a self-image when communicating with others is a universal phenomenon that pervades across cultures. In this context, the face we put up is nothing but an identity, the persona we keep up in society as a public image. Simply put, the face represents how one would like to be viewed by others in society. In heated arguments or conflicts, one's face is sometimes threatened by others, and thus the person tends to attempt to save or restore his or her face in order to avoid losing social status. This set of communicative behaviors, according to the theory, is called face work. Stella's theory on face negotiation and face work is based on the underlying assumption that, regardless of one's culture, all people are concerned with saving face, particularly in an ongoing dispute. Relating this back to Kurt seems to be keenly aware of the importance of face negotiation, and we see Kurt giving his counterpart a couple of opportunities spread out in the interaction in order to allow his counterpart to pick a window where he feels ready to safely clarify his position or show his innocence in a way that could allow him to justify his actions without losing face. Effective negotiators never underestimate the importance of this. The maintenance of a positive face is vital to all of us, and when it's under threat, we feel the need to defend it. Some of us will cling onto it for dear life regardless of the negative impact it is likely to have on our personal relationships and communication. It's therefore crucial to continuously try to understand what your counterpart is after in the argument you're in, especially if the interaction has escalated into a heated and violent argument. More often than not, it's not about what is argued on the surface that dictates what they actually want. Instead, ask yourself, do they feel disrespected? If so, they probably want respect, which is free and better than violence. Are they secretly crying out for recognition? Do you sense a longing for acceptance behind their actions? Is he or she in dire need for someone to show them affection? Whatever the reason is, if you manage to accurately spot one of these core needs, you have the power to diffuse the whole situation by simply offering to give them what they need in exchange for something you would like in return. The key here is to define what it means to reciprocate and specify what you expect in return. This eliminates the ambiguity that often surrounds random negotiations and heated arguments, because even if the other side acknowledges your concession, they might reciprocate with something of low value unless you specify what would satisfy your needs. Keep your eyes on the end goal and try to reach a win-win outcome where both parties can leave feeling that they got what they wanted or needed. And lastly, as much as others may need to change, or we may want them to change, the only person we can continually inspire, prod, and shape with any degree of success is a person in the mirror. So, to summarize my analysis: 1. Effective communicators know that if a potentially explosive situation is a near possibility, the best way to diffuse the other party's aggression or completely disarm the hostile person's advances is to have a plan beforehand. Kurt is seen throughout this series going from place to place and meticulously gather every piece of information he can get on anyone he's looking for before meeting them, and this is something you and I can try to implement in our own lives if it's possible. Prepared negotiators don't only have the benefit of making less mistakes, but they also command more respect both during and after the negotiation. 2. Acknowledging their emotion is one of the most powerful tools you and I can utilize to show him or her that we understand their perspective, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. Like Kurt taught us, the first step to labeling is detecting the other person's emotional state. The trick to spotting feelings is to pay close attention to changes people undergo when they respond to external events. 3. When approaching the hostile person, make sure every single part of your body is aligned with what you're trying to communicate. If our goal is to diffuse the situation and reason with the person instead of aggravating it, we need to make sure that we choose our words carefully. Even if Kurt made plenty of mistakes in his high-stake dispute, he made sure to correct them as he went along and made sure to apply the right tonality when needed to get his message across. 4. Understand what your counterpart is after in the argument. More often than not, it's not about what is argued about on the surface. It's our responsibility to dig deeper and try to look for any underlying emotional need that hasn't been met yet. While doing this, try to help your counterpart to save face if the uncovering may put them in a bad light. Statements like, obviously this can be interpreted in several ways. Perhaps there are other reasons that I'm not aware of. Here is some information that you probably did not have access to. I understand your conclusion, but have you considered that? All of them can be useful to get out of a heated argument and help them save face at the same time. Nonetheless, I'm sure I haven't captured the entirety of Kurt's conflict resolution skills, and I admit that I may have stretched or read between the lines a bit in a couple of scenes to make my points. Therefore, there are probably a bunch of you who don't agree with my analysis. That's completely fine. Whether you disagree with me or not, I'd still like for you to dislike or like the video and to write your thoughts or phrase your own analysis down below, and let's have a discussion about it. Also, if you have seen this show already, don't forget to comment what your favorite Kurt moment or quote is. With that being said, again, if you like this type of videos, be sure to like the video and subscribe. Peace.